Turn in your Bibles to the book of Amos, and we're going to continue on in chapter 5, where the theme again is just this notion of the injustice of the Israelites and God's condemnation, and yet in the midst of that, God is calling out to them, "Seek me and you will live." So despite heaping all these warnings and judgments, God is also calling out, please repent. And yet we talked last time about how there's a tension there. He knows they're not, and yet he still offers this genuine repentance to them. And I think some of what's wrapped up in a lot of the condemnation that is coming upon Amos, I think while it's very egregious now, it didn't necessarily start off just everyone's just this horrible, egregious sinner. Like when you go back to Genesis and you consider the time of Noah's flood, where every thought of every person's heart was only evil continually. It's not like everyone just woke up and got to that point. It's certainly there was some sort of progression. And as I was thinking about this passage and thinking about how this applies to myself, I think one of the notions that we get out of this is the idea that, it's okay when I do it. It's not okay when everyone else does it. Say, cut in line. But, in my situation, it was very urgent, so I was justified when I did it, right? And that kind of self-justifying behavior where an injustice is okay when I do it because either I'm special or my circumstance is different, you just multiply that by everybody. And then all of a sudden you have a nation or a country or world that is just out of control. And I think we see a little bit of that idea here in Amos. Now, this is going to be a little bit more interactive in a way because I got a couple of videos at the front because of how this text is laid out. But let's get back into Amos, and we'll start actually in verse 4, even though we're going from 8 to 17 today. And Amos 5:4 begins, "For thus says Yahweh to the house of Israel, seek me and live, but do not seek Bethel, and do not enter into Gilgal or cross over to Beersheba, for Gilgal shall surely go into exile, and Bethel shall come to nothing." Remember, those places were places of idol worship. So if they're thinking, we just need to, put in time, we just need to go to church and show up and everything will smooth over. I know God's mad at us. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that in the past 20 years of ministry here, where people show up at church, they're in some kind of trouble or mess, and they just think, if I spend a little time in the old house of God, sitting in one of these pews, things will smooth over. And that's this idea here. So when God is saying, seek me and live, but don't go to those places, he's saying you cannot go to say a church or a place of worship and think that's the same as seeking me, like earnestly with your heart. You need to seek God truly, and the true God you must seek. And so they won't. And so he calls out again, "Seek Yahweh and live, lest he break out like fire in the house of Joseph and to devour with none to quench it for Bethel. O you who turn justice to wormwood and cast down righteousness to the earth." So again, there's this negative consequence. There's a threat. Seek God and live. Well, what's the flip side? Ignore him and be destroyed. Now, this should be an easy judgment call. Because if someone said, here, you can have $1 million, or I'm going to keep kicking you in the shins for 24 hours. And who chooses being kicked in the shins? And yet our sin is that diabolical and that deceptive is that people do. It doesn't seem as obvious as that. And so in poetic form, the prophet is going to emphasize why it is just absurd for us to try to ignore God or to not seek him out. He's going to start with a couple word pictures here. In verse 8, he says, "He who made the Pleiades and Orion and turns deep darkness into the morning and darkens the day into night, who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth, Yahweh is his name." So these are like, if you think you can ignore God and be destroyed, God is unavoidable. You cannot just ignore him. So the reference to Pleiades and Orion, how do we know this is referring specifically to those constellations? Because the Hebrew does not say Pleiades and Orion. Those are like, I'll show you a video in just a second of those constellations. We know because in the Greek translation of the Hebrew, The Jewish scholars who wrote the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation, they wrote Pleiades and Orion, so we presume they had access to the knowledge that the Hebrews had of constellations and stars, and so that they had appropriately translated the Hebrew words that are there into Pleiades and Orion. So if you don't remember what they look like, I didn't know what the Pleiades were, I will show you a quick video. Actually, can we turn off the lights in there? Does someone mind turning off the lights? It'll be a little easier to see. It's only a minute long. It's just a quick time lapse. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
So if you remember Orion, he's kind of got the 3 stars that make his belt, and he's got a bow. And then if you go almost like to where the bow is pointed is this cluster of stars called the Pleiades. Now you can look it up on your phone and find better views, but I like that one just so you can get a kind of a sense of the relative positionings. And I guess there's some myths associated with Orion, and the Pleiades is like these 7 stars, and they represent these 7 maidens or something that Orion is chasing after. You can look that up. This is not a mythology study, it's a Bible study. But even in that video, there's still some light pollution. I hope you've all had the experience, of course, of going out into the desert or someplace far away from the city and looking up and just seeing all the lights of the heavens. It's a glorious thing. It's a humbling idea. And from the time that this was written, again, say, somewhere around 700-800 BC, so that's almost 3,000 years ago, we know a lot more about what's going on in our universe and the galaxies. We know that when it's pointed that little dot that said Andromeda, and it's like really faint little dot, we know that that is a galaxy full of like billions more stars, right? Like that there are some things you're looking at there that are not just one star, there are clusters. It's a galaxy there, just like our Milky Way galaxy. And if you think of the Milky Way, it's huge. The scale of the universe is only bigger than what they understood it to be, and they at that time already understood it to be quite vast. That's why it's being used in analogy over and over again. We see the same analogy to Orion and Pleiades in Job 9 and so on. The idea is very much the expanse of the heavens declares the glory of God. It is big, and every year that passes in terms of astronomical study only makes us more in awe and confused by the vastness and depth of the universe and all that is in it. So in a way, our idea of how big and powerful God is, it should be in a way like experientially bigger than theirs, because we know, maybe not experientially, because I've never been much past our planet. But, in terms of having this knowledge base of how big the universe is, we should know. Can you ignore the universe? No, you can't. Can you ignore God? No. And of course, the reference turns darkness into the morning, darkens day into night. It's talking about just a whole cycle that now, of course, we know we're rotating and we're going around the sun and all these things, that what's really happening is, and it's involving the entire universe. It's involving the entire universe day and night. You are seeing at night, if you could see just an infinite distance, it'd be this incredible vastness. Every day you would be seeing this landscape. I think I showed you that one video about the scale of the universe with the tiny marbles that represented the galaxies. If I haven't shown that to you, I'll show it to you. But it just points out just how huge it is. And every day, you just take this for granted. Every day, and you look out at the stars at night, and then you see the sun rise in the morning, this whole universe is laid before your eyes. You know, you can't ignore that. Like what person ignores that it's a new day? You know what I mean? Or that the nighttime has come. You don't ignore that. You sit your whole life around that. You don't go driving at night because of that. These are things that deeply impact everything you do. You don't have plants. You don't have, all the things we take for granted without that. Who put that in place? Is God. So how can you ignore God? If you can't ignore the fact that it turns day to night, night to day, how can you ignore God? And yet seek God and live? Ignore him and be destroyed. Yes?
I like this passage specifies the Pleiades and the Orion because they are specific constellations. And I'm really thankful that you showed that video.
Yeah.
Because it got me thinking God is intentional, God is specific. And the secular view is everything is just random and it just got here somehow. And well, we're luck of the draw. But this passage is saying that there was intention for these two specific constellations.
Sure.
Yes, God created everything, but God created everything with specificity.
And very deliberately in Genesis, we're all the way back in Genesis with this passage. It takes us all the way back to Genesis and the purpose for which things were created. Genesis 1:14, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. Now, of course, some of that is to do with the sun and moon in particular, but it's talking about all the stars and galaxies as well, or what we would come to understand later as being galaxies and whole, entire systems in and of themselves. But they exist for a purpose, to mark their consistency is to mark time and is to mark seasons and so on. So in that just in kind of that deliberate sense, you're saying these are deliberately placed, but for our enjoyment. Oh, gosh, I mean, I could do a whole thing. I was, tempted to do a whole thing. If you ever get into, say, Answers in Genesis material or Creation Ministries, they'll talk about our placement even within the Milky Way galaxy. So let alone in our solar system, third planet from the sun, we're at the perfect distance to have water, but not be too hot or too cold. We're in the perfect place to have life. I was telling my kids earlier today, just because our Earth is tilted, I forgot how many degrees. 23 and a half degrees. It gives us seasons. It gives us, winter and summer. It gives us the crops and everything. Just if it was just like this going around the sun, no angle, you don't have seasons, but just this, and all of a sudden you have the beauty of seasons. So not only in our solar system, though, our solar system in its place in the Milky Way galaxy itself, if we were in a different spot, we would be blinded by all the light. We're in like a perfect spot, even within the Milky Way galaxy, to observe the Milky Way galaxy. Does that make sense? So it's our privileged position here is not just that it can sustain life, it can sustain knowing where we are, or knowing ourselves. So it's very unique. And again, not to get into aliens and all that stuff, we have no other sign of any other kind of life, intelligent life, as far as we have seen, which I think that's going to be the case. And I think we are the only special creation of God in this universe. And you say, why then is there so much bigness to this universe, so vast, and yet we're the only life? The point is to demonstrate two simultaneous facts. One, how great God is. So he's just that much bigger, as we've been saying, than they even knew 2,000, 3,000 years ago. But also to point out how insignificant you are. You're like nothing in comparison to this vast universe. But who does God care about? You. But you're this guy that is trying to ignore God. It's insane, but that is the depths of our sin. He calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth. Yahweh's name, of course, again, kind of going back to Genesis and is separating the land and the seas. This is a silly video, so it's not as intense, but this one is just for fun.
Is it Mr. Bean?
No, not this time. That's 2 tons of water dropping onto a minivan. It just obliterates it, right? Like, yeah, that's really fun. So I was looking at this passage, I happened to come across this video, and he's pouring out water on the surface of the earth. Like, that's destructive power. How much water do you think is on this planet? In comparison to that destroyed a minivan, 2 tons of water, that's nothing. That's like a drop in the bucket. I mean, to use an analogy, like, there's so much water, 3/4 of this earth covered by water. It has so much power. It's so vast and so deep. What happens if you go to the bottom of the ocean? You will die just from the pressure of being crushed, right? There are parts of this earth that are less explored than the moon. Just because of the depth of the water makes it nearly impossible to go there, right? And to God, though, what is it like? It's like a child with a little plastic watering container and just pouring it out over their God. And that is what it's like. All the waters of this earth, that is what it's like to God. Can you ignore the ocean? You cannot ignore the ocean. It sustains the world, and it's necessary for even the water, the fresh water we have, right? It's picked up from the ocean, and God has the most efficient distillery. We try to make salt water into fresh water. It takes a lot of energy. You can't do it efficiently. God does it every day. It's called the water cycle, and it's necessary for oxygen and all these things. Like, water is incredible. We need it. You can't ignore water. I don't care if you live in the middle of the desert. You need water. You need that 3/4 earth being water too. You can be landlocked, and water is essential. And God says, "I pour it out. It's just like cupping it in my hand and just pouring out on the earth. It's nothing to Him." You can't ignore the water. How can you ignore God? That's the analogy that's being built up here. The point is that it would be then almost nothing. You go against this God, what are you going against here? If He says, if you sin, there is judgment, how are you going to contest that? How are you going to make an argument against Him? What are you going to say to justify yourself? He says He makes destruction flash forth against the strong, so that destruction comes upon the fortress. This, you think of all the kingdoms of man and all their bunkers and their fortresses. Like, if God wanted to, how hard would it be for the one who flings the stars into space, who turns darkness into morning and day into night, who pours out the waters of the ocean like it's nothing? How hard is it for Him to just squish this nation, in particular this nation of Israel, like nothing to Him? But this is the kicker. The answer is, how could you challenge Him? How could you defy Him? We do. We just do. Look at the next verse. They hate Him who reproves in the gate, and they abhor Him who speaks the truth. Now, this could mean that they hit God, if you imagine God is the one that's correcting them. Remember, the gate was a place actually that the people would gather, and elders or judges of that city or town would give judgments from there. And so the idea, this is a place where you judge law, and so it's a place should be of truth. There should be true witnesses speaking there. There should be a judge that's judging rightly there. It's a place of truth, the gate. And yet it's saying they hate Him who reproves in the gate. They abhor Him who speaks the truth. And either that's like a metaphor for God standing there, or for any person that's trying to speak the truth or represent the truth is being persecuted and hated. It doesn't matter, because it means that sinners, they absolutely will try to defy God and ignore Him. And they don't want to be corrected and don't want to hear the truth. And this is what I was sort of getting at, is everyone wants to think it's okay, or it's not okay when they do it, but it's okay when I do it. So don't correct me, don't tell me the truth. I kind of know what it is, but I'm just saying in this circumstance, it's okay that I defrauded the government. But generally speaking, I don't like when anyone else does it, but my situation was different. It was more particular. That's why don't bother correcting me. It's okay for me, it's not okay for you. It's just that sort of thing is what happens all the time. Sin is by its very nature contrary to correction and to truth. After all, if you weren't a sinner, either you wouldn't need to be corrected, or if you were corrected, you wouldn't take it as any kind of slight or anything. I say that because Jesus is perfect morally, but when he was a baby, I don't know, did he get walking on his first try? It's a weird thought, I know, but I'm just trying to point out that perfection may not mean that you do woodworking perfectly. I don't know if Jesus was a carpenter like his father was, as we imagine it. Did he get everything right first try, or did he learn to do it? In which case, perfection would mean that if he was corrected, he didn't get mad or offended by it. He just, okay, this is how you do it now. I know it's a funny thought, but I'm just contrasting it with sin. Sin, if you were not a sinner, you would not abhor the truth. You would not be offended by the truth. You wouldn't be hurt by correction, or you would maybe not even need to be corrected at all. So this is definitely having to do with sinners. For those who would think it's not a big deal when we sin and go against God, you have to remember all this stuff. How could you even dare to think? Or like we said this morning, expect that everything else needs to run along God's laws of physics and operate according to a very consistent system of how electrons interact or how gravity works, and everything's obeying and submitting to God's ordained order of things except you, and you get a pass? Doesn't make any sense. If everyone is excusing themselves that way, you have a problem. You just look at the world. It is full of exactly that problem of people condemning sin, but then being like, but when I do it though, I want grace. But when you do it, the hammer should come down. So even that small attitude of don't tell me I'm wrong, don't try to correct me, it turns into societal issues and problems and injustices. And what we're going to talk about in particular now is social injustices, namely about the poor. We talk a lot about the poor today because it comes up a lot in Amos in the context of why they're being judged. So here we have a therefore. Therefore, because you trample on the poor and you exact taxes of grain from him, you have built houses of hewn stone, but you shall not dwell in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you shall not drink their wine. For I know how many are your transgressions and how great are your sins. You who afflict the righteous, who take a bribe, and turn aside the needy in the gate. Therefore he who's prudent will keep silent in such a time, for it is an evil time. So again, we have the mention of this gate, which is where people went to go get justice. It was like going to the courts, or going down to Santa Ana and trying to get an issue settled. Yeah, Alan.
So how do you find poor in this verse?
That's what we're going to talk about. Okay. So clearly the consequence here is you are trying to do things to prosper yourself or benefit yourself, and you're going to be frustrated in that because you afflicted the poor, and there is going to be an evil time that's coming, right? So negative things. So here we said, kind of like, how can you ignore God? You can't. He's unignorable. Well, you say, well, I acknowledge God is out there. God is big and powerful and all these things. But here it's connecting how you treat other people with how you understand how unignorable God is. In other words, if you really do have a high view of God, like, oh, God is so amazing, he created all these things, he created the waters, and he created the stars and the heavens above, and wow, that really means a lot to me. And then you go and you kick dogs for fun, and you make fun of widows and orphans. There's a mismatch, right? You are still ignoring God. even if you think you're acknowledging him by recognizing some of his divine attributes, how you treat other people is demonstrating whether you really know God or not. And in particular, in these passages, is about how you treat the poor. So, get some water real fast. I got a water bottle here. Sometimes it feels like there's a very specific dust moat that just lodges in the exact spot to make me cough, so I apologize. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is how did God call for the Israelites to care for the poor? Now, in some ways, there's a lot of people, even non-Christians, who will lay hold, especially of the book of Amos, and try to use Amos as this rallying call for social justice movements and point out how God very much cares about the poor and how you treat them. And these passages get used to justify all different kinds of programs and isms, socialism, and this kind of ism and that kind of ism. And we have to understand these things in their context. Israel was a theocracy. So for everyone looking at Amos, like secular people looking at Amos and see if your Christians really cared about social justice, cared about the poor, you'd be on board with our version of social justice. Because look, even your Bible says you should be doing this. Well, do you also want with these social justice kind of passages for the rights of the poor, do you also want the theocracy part where you have a priesthood and Levites that are offering sacrifices? Do you also want the Mosaic covenant, right? Because those all went together. This is not how necessarily every nation should run. This is how Israel should run as a theocracy. So it's funny when people, very secular people, like, look at Amos and blah, blah, blah. We should use this as a paradigm for how we should treat this or that, or support this program or that program. Well, this is given in the context of a theocracy. So do you want to go back to theocracy too? And like, no, they don't. They don't. But having said all that, then let's take a look at some of the ways that God intended to take care of the poor. And these are not in any particular order. I should have probably put them in a particular order. But look at this. The idea of gleaning, and this comes up in Ruth. Ruth, who was a poor woman, is allowed to glean the fields of Boaz. In other words, Boaz has his crops, and when they do the harvest, they are not to get every single grain of rice or wheat and every single ear of corn. They're to leave the edges open. Why? So that the poor could come and the sojourner could come and glean off the edges and provide for themselves. And this is in obedience to Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. Meaning if stuff fell, right, as you're harvesting, you don't go back through with all of your workers and get every single thing that you missed. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am Yahweh your God. So, does God care? Is there kind of a safety net, if you will call it that, a social program that God has instituted? Yeah, it's called, in an agricultural society, it's just don't need to take every single scrap of harvest from your field. So, if you want to make some kind of analogy to that in a world where we're not an agricultural society, I suppose you could try to make some kind of analogy. But notice there also, it's not necessarily a handout as you might think of it. The poor had to go and gather it for themselves. It's not that someone did it for them. Now, Boaz did it for Ruth. But because he's kind of in, so here, have all this too, right? He gave her a lot more, if you remember that. So, but see, there's a little bit of something else going on there. Yeah, the poor were to do that, right? Yeah. Second is this is again particular to Israel, to other Israelites, you are not to charge interest, or usury is another word for it, on loans to the poor. So, look at this. If your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and a sojourner, and he shall live with you. Take no interest from him or profit, but fear your God, that your brother may live beside you. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him your food for profit. I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God.
Aren't you losing money on interest, like, in inflation? Like, if you don't get the interest, you're going to be losing money, right?
Yes.
So that's what's supposed to be, right?
Yes.
Is that referring to brother in the?
Fellow Israelite. Yeah, fellow Israelite. They could charge it of non-Israelites. And it's because you don't know them and you're not obligated to them. But here, if we're saying we are all under the Mosaic covenant, we are all under in this theocracy, right? And we believe all the same things. We all agree on who God is. I should not charge you interest on that loan. Now, do you have to give a loan? Well, here it kind of intimates that you need to take care of the poor in your midst in Israel. And we're going to get to some other passages that are sort of interesting. But you also find that there's a lot of, remember who you were in Egypt. Remember that you were sojourners or that you were poor in Egypt. So you better, knowing that I treated you well, God speaking, you ought to treat other people well. I got these out of order, I'm sorry. 4 before 3, doesn't matter. Limits on collateral. So, while you might not charge interest, you could take collateral. But you couldn't take collateral of things they needed. So,
If they're poor, do they have anything but necessities?
hold on,
I mean, not get this.
let me find, do I got these out of order? Oh, we're going to have to use your Bible. You're going to have to take out your Bible if I can't. So,
Is this the don't take his coat overnight?
oh yeah, oh no, here we go. Okay. No, I got it right here. Okay, all right, here we go. Exodus, it was right there, I'm sorry. Exodus 22, 26 through 20, so you don't have to take out your Bible. You can still take out your Bible. If ever you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering, and it is cloak for his body, and what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I'm compassionate. So back in those days, a cloak was a basic kind of attire for you that served as a lot of things. I mean, you could use it as a blanket, and you would, it was something that was part of everyone's wardrobe, and if you're a poor person, it was like you lived in it, right? It's the only source of warmth when the sun went down. So if you were to take someone's cloak as collateral for their loan, you're supposed to give it back to them every night, and they give it to you every morning, in a way, like literally in that sense. But the point was, you cannot take something that's going to make, that he needs. He needs that, he's going to freeze to death, right, if he doesn't have it. So you give it to him. Now, if the weather's balmy, he doesn't really need the cloak, I guess you can hold on to it. But the point is, if it's freezing or something outside, at the least you can do, let's say that, the least you can do is give him his cloak, because he needs that. But another similar idea is no one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge. A pledge is like a collateral, for that would be taking a life in pledge. Now, this mill or upper millstone is part of how they make their livelihood. It's when they grind out grain, you'd have a big stone running in a track, right? And it would crush the grain underneath it. You cannot take that. They cannot crush the grain. They cannot work without that. So you cannot take their means of making money from them. Now again, this is an agricultural society. If you try to make analogies to things now, it's hard to make analogies one-to-one. But the idea is, when you take things in pledge, you don't take things that are like super meaningful or necessary to them. It's like I guess a car would be one. Like, you need a car, most people, to get to work. So I said, okay, I'm going to lend you money, but I'm going to take your car. Well, that severely hampers my ability to go to work. I'm going to have to pay money. I'm going to be on another schedule, for a bus or whatever. Like, you're making my life kind of way worse and way harder by taking money. Well, you don't have anything else that's worth a lot of money, so that's what I'm taking. You're not supposed to do that.
Your brother is an Uber driver.
Yeah, that's good. He's an Uber driver, yeah. Okay, very good. So that's another kind of right or a way the the Lord was looking out for the poor. Another one is this. It's a prohibition on delaying in paying the poor person. You shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your towns. So just in general, you're not to be, the word oppress, it can mean a lot of things, but it's basically like use force to get things out of people that you want, okay? It is to use force or threats to get things out of people. And so you're just in general, just because someone is poor and needy doesn't mean you have a right to threaten them or use violence on them to get something you want out of them. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry out against you to Yahweh and you be guilty of sin. Now, again, culturally speaking, they typically played like day laborers that day. I mean, still now, if you hire a day laborer, they're typically expecting payment at the end of the day. And so you must give it to them. You're not going to hold on to it. You're not going to play games with it. You're not going to say half now, half later. You give them what you owe them, especially the poor, because that's all they have. Right now, again, what's the expectation? That they're working. The poor are working, that they are just expected to be treated in some sense very fairly, very equitably, and not just be looked down upon or think they have less rights or expectations just because they are poor. Fifthly, and this is one that is kind of explicitly mentioned here about how they're turned aside at the gate and the righteous are afflicted because they take bribes. Well, the poor are deserving of equal justice in court, Leviticus 19:15. You shall do no injustice in court. That's period, right? Of course, the courts of justice should be just, but you have to say it. You have to say it out loud. You have to make that clear. You have to, hold people accountable. It doesn't just happen. Like, you have to command it. It ought to be very obvious. The sky is blue kind of thing, but no. God is saying, you shall do no injustice in courts. Boy, what does that say about human nature? You have to say that out loud. But then he adds this, you shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. So this is in a way saying, it's not that poor people should have extra rights and rich people have less rights or anything like that. It should just be everyone is equal under the eyes of the law to be treated against what the law says, not based on any other kind of influence of man or judgment of man. It should just be, as they say, justice should be blind. It should not care who's sitting in front of me. Like a Zoom call, a judge on a Zoom call can't see the defendant or the plaintiff, right? And is just going by the facts of the case, should be able to come up with the same judgment as if they saw who the plaintiff and the defendant were, right? Like, it should not matter. It should be equal, and everyone should be able to expect that. It doesn't matter if you're poor, Jew, or Gentile, just anybody. It's kind of like what we're talking about this morning. Do these make sense?
So these like the dirt poor have nothing, just enough to live.
What? Wait, say it again?
These poor are like the dirt poor have just enough to live, nothing fancy,
Yeah.
special.
Yeah.
But you don't think about the court thing? I talked to someone at church, and he was like saying, men get screwed in court. They have to prove they're assumed guilty, and they have to prove innocent before they. You got in your jury's like, hey, look at you. No matter what the female says, you're guilty. Like almost like by default. You just like, dude, I'm writing that person's like.
Well, that'd be unjust, right?
That's how it is nowadays. I mean, if a male and female go into court, look at like those trials. They're all like a black man and like no one white man. They're like 80% or 90% of the jury's black, so the white's gonna get like screwed over. So
it goes the other way too, though, doesn't it? Why pick that example? So.
No, still, I mean, the male, female is like no one's gonna believe a male. I mean, it's the female.
What are you trying to point out though?
It's not justice when we have a male and female go in the court when the female's accusing the male of all this stuff.
It can go the other way too, man. On other cases, it can go the other way.
I don't see it half the time.
Well, that's the thing that happens a lot with justice and injustice.
Yeah.
is people see what they want to see, and people hear what they want to hear. So that's the whole point of like, it's okay when other people do it, or it's not okay when other people, but when I do it, it's okay. So what can happen is, say if you're Asian, you start giving Asian people a pass. Well, hey, Asian people are oppressed in this nation, so when we do something bad, well, it was justified because we've been screwed over or whatever, right? And so that's what happens when you start playing any kind of favorites, any kind of like seeing it like a certain way. Like, you should be equally willing to call out injustice in the courts or in people or in churches that are for, I'm a man, for men or against men, for Asians or against Asians. Like, I should be able to be trusted to give equal judgment on anybody as a Christian, I would say, but that was the expectation God had on the Israelites, no matter anything. But when I hear people say stuff like that, though, I'm not talking about you necessarily, but when I start hearing people say that kind of thing, I get concerned that there's going to be bias the other way, because I see a strong bias, say, in the courts, and it might be valid, it might be true. Let's say, and just get real honest here, like in custody cases, it is often stacked against the man. That's what we're talking about, right? But would it be right for me to see that and say my position now is that all women are liars and don't deserve any children, right? That would be wrong, right? So when someone's always pointing out the injustice that is maybe true or accurate against them, what I start to think is, well, if the shoe's ever on the other foot, I don't think I would trust them to make a right judgment if it was the opposite way. Because people are getting so adamant about how unjust it is one way. Like, do you know what I'm saying? So when it comes to a lot of social justice, they might be making some very valid observation about how courts have judged based on race or whatever. But when you keep saying that over and over and over again, I start to think if you're ever on a jury and there was like a person of the another race, I don't think they're going to get justice, because all this person never talks about or views it as this way. So I think the danger of constantly thinking that way, that's conservative, liberal, whatever, this race, that race, you just start to sound like I'm not going to trust you with any kind of justice because you're too hurt. You're too hurt to give justice the right way. So I think that's what we got to be careful of, right? That's why you be careful just not to keep hearing about injustice one way, always, because you're going to come out with probably a very, very colored and biased view. And I think Christians should rise above that. We have the Word of God. We have the Word of God. We have the Spirit of God. We have a gospel, again, that goes across all boundaries of language, time, and culture. So why would we bind ourselves to any kind of movement, social movement, that is specific to the advocating of like one kind or one perspective of justice? I think it'll make you a little unbalanced. I think there's a danger in it. And I'm not saying there are not causes that you ought not to be a part of. It just, you be very careful, because it'll start to color the gospel. I think I've seen that happen many times. And that's liberal and conservative. So I've seen it both ways for sure. Be very careful of that. Very true injustices that you see can make you very hardened against injustice the other way, if it ever was ever the other way. You know what I'm getting at here? Okay, all right. Wasn't exactly what I want to talk about, but it's good. It's good, actually. No, it's good. It's good. Okay. There is also a particular protection that often is reiterated over and over and over again. Of course, special categories of widows and orphans in Exodus 22 to 24. But this is like, by the way, I'm giving you like one passage. I could give you like 3, 4, 5 sometimes references for these, because it's the same thing over and over again. So I'm not giving every passage that references this. Exodus 22 to 24, you shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I'll kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. Like, okay. Yeah, he's taking that pretty seriously. Now remember, again, widows and orphans in that society very much on the lowest rungs of society. It's like you got no family, and family is everything as far as your protection and your social and financial support and network. Like that is very key. So if you didn't have that, you were kind of at the mercy of other people. And God is saying, exactly, they should be at the mercy of other people, and that should mean that they are not going to be mistreated, that they're going to be taken care of, and that widows and orphans will be amongst you the blessed, right? And the most cared for and looked after. But so often, even in Amos, but other places, you did not care for the widow, you did not care for the orphan, you did not care for the least of these, and I'm bringing this judgment. It is such a stark warning, because this is not just for the widow and the orphan per se. This is a social status. This is a condition of both a societal, economic, and a familial nature. So there are people that are just as hurting as the widow or orphan would have been back then, now, that are not necessarily widows or orphans. They might be single mothers. They might be kids who are being raised by grandparents or relatives, and they're not orphans because their parents are dead. They're just orphans because their parents are not around, right? There's very similar, analogous situations, and we should care about them. Is the idea. Now, again, in the context of Israel, theocratic, very close-knit society where everything's intertwined. Their worship of God and their community life and even their economic, like tax life, like when they give their tithe, that is to support the Levites, a whole tribe that had no land because they're to serve God. And so all the other tribes, they had land, and so they'd have crops and they'd have livestock, and they'd bring 1/10 of it to the temple, and the priests were to survive off of that. But even their tax system was all woven together in support. I didn't put these passages down, maybe I should, but some of those tithes were supposed to go every 3 years. The tithe would, oh, maybe I did. No, I didn't. The tithes would go to, it's almost like a party where it would be brought to the city, and everyone would feast and take part of it, including the poor. So even some of the tithes did go to supporting the poor. It wasn't like a direct way. So those are all woven together. You are not going to resurrect that system in America right now. It just doesn't work like that. What is our obligation or duty? I think what every Christian at least needs to consider is the heart of God in how he takes care of the poor, which we're getting a snapshot of today. And, somehow meaningfully, wisely applying that to both our personal lives, our church lives, and then the government, lives. So I don't know, I cannot say hard and fast what these look like, by the way. Probably should have saved this for the end, but you need to understand God's heart first about the poor, and then you'll start to think, how do I need to apply this in my own family? How do I apply this in the context of the church? How do I apply this in the context of my neighborhood or city? How should America or whatever country you are from apply this? Those are increasing questions of wisdom, because no one hears, not even Israel does this, right? Not even Israel is operating off of this. Do you think they're not charging interest for loans? I'm pretty sure they are. I don't know, it's a guess, but I'm pretty sure they are. So anyway. And this is a very significant one as far as the poor is concerned. It has to do with the fact that every 7 years in Israel, there would be a year of Jubilee. All debts were canceled, and everyone who was a slave was let free. And oftentimes slavery was because of being in debt. Like if you went, we talked about this before, I think, they didn't have jails back then. They didn't have prisons. They had fines. They had corporal punishment, but they didn't have jails. And so if you went bankrupt and couldn't pay your debts, it's not like you went to jail or something. You would have to pay it off. You'd become a slave and start paying it off. But every 7th year, you'd be freed. Yes?
Did they not have safe havens where people could go when they felt that, okay, it looks like an accident happened, somebody lost their life? Yeah. Those be considered sort of like jails? Because in a sense...
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So there were towns that were set up as, I'm forgetting the term. Yeah, refuge. Yeah, city of refuge. Thank you. It's thinking safe haven. But cities of refuge where if you committed essentially manslaughter, so you accidentally killed someone, there's no murderous intent, but you did kill someone, while you were not guilty of murder, the family of the person who died might seek vengeance. So you could flee to one of these cities of refuge, and they could not extradite you or kill you in these cities of refuge, and you're kind of stuck there. But it's not like a prison cell. It's like you could live in this city for the rest of your life, or until they forgave you, or whenever you wanted to risk showing your face again, or everyone who sought your life was dead. That kind of thing. So, but it's interesting. Like part of that is because there's no like jails or prison system. You think about that, like a no prison system. How would that work? Would you want that? That's why you cannot just like take what Israel's doing or the Old Testament says and just map it onto America and think that's, again, conservative, liberal, like it doesn't work necessarily. Yes?
I never figured out the 7th year. What if you like the end of the 6th year, you can go become a slave, and then the 7th year, you can just free just after like 10 years?
Literally, that is what we're going to talk about. Literally, that's what we're going to talk about. All right. So, Exodus 23, 10 and 11. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow. So this coincides with the year of Jubilee. So not only that's canceled, and if you're a slave, you're let free. Also, the 7th year that you let the land lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. In other words, you don't intentionally seed or harvest your fields. You just let it go. But stuff is going to grow, right? And that stuff that grows, that is for the poor people, and that's for the beasts, right? So that's another way that this year of Jubilee works, 7th year. Here's the next part, okay? Deuteronomy 15. At the end of every 7 years, so this would be the same, year where you let the land lie fallow, you shall grant a release, and this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor, his brother, because Yahweh's release has been proclaimed. Of a foreigner you may exact it, but whatever of yours is with your brother, your hand shall release. But there will be no poor among you, for Yahweh will bless you in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess. Now, this is not saying there shall never ever be poor among you, but that year, there's not going to be any poor. There shouldn't be any, like people that owe money, right? That ought not to. That's what it means. Because later on, he's going to say, but the poor you have with you always. So this is talking about, in particular, in the context of letting everyone go of their debts. So there should be no one that's poor in the sense of owing money.
Could you play a system?
Huh? Just wait for a minute. Okay, if only you will strictly obey the voice of Yahweh your God, being careful to do all this commandment that I command you today. For Yahweh your God will bless you as he promised you, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow, and shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. If among you one of your brothers should become poor, in any of your towns within your land that Yahweh your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. But you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor neighbor, and you give him nothing, and he cry to Yahweh against you, and you be guilty of sin. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him. Because for this Yahweh your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake, for there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land. Now this is like this is about if a Hebrew man or a woman is sold to you. Again, if you go into bankruptcy, you're going to buy someone's labor, and they're going to be your slave or servant. He shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you let him go from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. As Yahweh your God has blessed you, you shall give it to him. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yahweh your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this today. This is talking about, actually, we don't need to go that. It's talking about, someone might say, I kind of like having a roof over my head and 4 meals a day and being safe than trying to just be out there and try to scrape for food and be poor again. So, I'll just stay with you. And so this was a system by which a person could become a permanent slave of that household. To your question, it's answered here. It's an unworthy thought to think, oh man, I'm only going to get a year out of this guy and then I got to pay him back. So that's an unworthy thought. It's a hardening your heart against him.
There are people who just play a system that they, next year is the 7th year, so I'll just screw around 6 years ago.
But then that's your heart that's bad as the one who's asking for help. But if you're truly poor, what are you going to do? What alternative do you have except to ask for the money, right? And then hope someone's generous. So, I mean, it's, yeah.
So, I'm gonna wait till the
Yeah, that's
6th
the-
year
yeah, that's
to claim bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, you just,
Right.
You time it on purpose.
And you better not harden your heart against me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain degree, you
Well,
gotta,
God doesn't speak to that.
That's the whole thing I was trying to say.
No, I'm not being,
yeah,
No.
yeah.
he didn't speak to the
Isn't it interesting?
guy who's the brother.
Yeah.
Could be grudging
Yeah.
the other way.
I think in the context of this kind of society, it's hard to fake being poor, like being really poor. You know what I mean? Like either you're poor or not. Like either you are living on the street and you've only got the cloak. Like, nowadays when they have like workers' comp claims and things like that, the private investigator will go and film you to see, is he on crutches all the time? Or is he getting in and out of his car just fine? You have all that kind of thing. But in this society, you all live together, you're all around each other. The poor guy's actually poor. So that there's not any question about it that he's secretly hiding a Lexus in his garage or something like that. It just wasn't, I think it is a lot harder to try and game the system that way. Not that people couldn't lie about it. Sure, people could. But I think it was a little bit harder to try and game the system. And again, this is not a system that's being gamed. It's not this is not a government-run program. This is individuals with other individuals. So I don't know if I'm obligated. Well, in a way, no one's like a stranger either. Like your family, your kin, everyone here is going to be related to each other. So, if you're really that terrible person to screw over your relative or something, I don't know. And people could, and they did, right? Obviously they did. But the danger was more the other way, is rich and powerful people oppressing the poor. That's way more prevalent than the other way, right? So
Well, I think the key is what you just said, but should become poor.
yeah.
It's not as if I overspent, and that's not the same.
Yeah.
It's
Circumstances.
circumstances.
Yeah. It's an obvious circumstance.
On the other side,
Yeah.
made a widow.
Yeah. It's an obvious circumstance.
Should become poor.
Everyone would know if your crops failed or if all of your livestock got disease and died. It's just, you're not hiding that. And if you made the claim that happened, right? And then I don't think it says here that you cannot investigate the claim of whether they're poor or not, right? And I go, oh, all of your flocks died, right? And then, I think it's okay to go and to your house, man, I'm so sorry. Yeah, they're all dead. It doesn't say that you can't investigate the claim, but if I go there and there's a Lexus next to the sheep, and they're all alive, oh, yeah, I'm not gonna lend to you. What does it make? I know nowadays, yeah. Jamie, you had a comment or question?
It's an interesting refrain where it keeps pointing out I also find it interesting because our hearts do this exact same thing, quickly, and even talking about the Sabbath, how much I recoil at being well, you can't just not work,
Yeah.
provide for yourself. And the thought of the 7th year of letting your crops just go, and the whole point God keeps reminding who is taking care of you, and when you have anything, it's not yours. I'm yours. Just, and I question because when they are exiled and God is saying I'm giving the land the rest.
Yes,
Never-
yeah, it's 70 years of rest.
Is there ever recorded a time when they did actually?
That's right. So if you are looking for, I think maybe like one time in some like later king, it's like, oh no, we've never done this, and they did it. But the implication seems to be, and I could be wrong, I'll double check, but the exile is 70 years, and that is to make up for the Sabbath years that they didn't keep. So if you do the math, that's 490 years, right? 70 times 7. So in 400, almost 500 years, they didn't keep it, is my reading of that. Now, I might need to investigate that, but that's as good as saying that they never did it, ever since the time of David, at least, because by then it's been a few hundred years, maybe even before. So 586 BC. So you subtract about 500 years, 1086 BC. That's about the time of King David and Saul. So maybe ever since there was a kingdom, they didn't do it. That's why I said this morning, was there ever a time when Israel actually kept all of the laws? No. So how could you then, again, bring that yoke upon the Gentiles? Well, we didn't do it for our entire existence, but you know what? Why don't you give it a go? You Gentiles, why don't you give it a chance? Like what? They don't even have the priesthood, the sacrament, nothing. So what do you mean keep all the commandments? It's ridiculous and preposterous. There's another, Hugo, do you have a question or comment? Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to say was that as you're touching this point here, the one thing that comes to my mind right now, because of the fact the Sabbath is approaching, so therefore, hey, it looks like
Yeah.
Well, I thought about the prodigal son.
Yeah.
It was very known that he took all the money.
Yeah.
And he spent the whole thing.
Yeah.
And yet the father receives him and puts the ring on
Yeah.
him
Yeah.
and places him back. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you spent it all, but he didn't see it that way. And in a sense, it almost kind of brings me to this part,
Yeah.
which is, it's not to have that thought process.
Yeah. How exceedingly generous and gracious is God, to the poor. This is just a little taste of it that we get to do. But the prodigal son, he's at that point destitute. And how does the father receive the prodigal son? It's as a son, a full son, with all the rights, privileges, blessings, honor, glory, riches. So you are just being asked just a little bit of the kind of generosity God shows us who are poor in spirit. I mean, that's a really good point. Again, are we really talking about social systems and, how should America address the issue of homelessness? How should California? There's maybe some principles here. I don't find a lot of very hard and fast analogies. Like, could you force companies to use some of their profit for this or that? Do you make it voluntary? This is all woven into a system, a theocracy, an understanding within the family of Israel. It's not like very, cosmopolitan, multicultural, large, non-agricultural nations. You just can't map it one-to-one, but you need to find a way, in some way to insert into your life, impart into your heart this attitude of God's towards the poor, and somehow live it out. I don't even know what that's going to look like for you. For us as a church, there's ways that we do benevolence and things like that to address some of these issues, but there's not I think governments can choose to handle it many different ways and try to address it many different ways, and some are going to be better, some are going to be worse. Again, there's no prison system necessary. When you factor that all in, I don't know how to just take this and just, bring it over to American civilization. But there's always been, not always, but Christians have always had a certain heart for the poor, the orphan, the widow. You ask yourself, how many orphanages started by Christians? Probably nearly all of them that are in the world, right? Christians have been known for these sorts of things.
Hospitals in the U.S.
Right. Yeah, so you ask yourself the question, Christians have been known for this, somehow, some way, you had to comment back, yeah.
I was just going to say that, you asked about corporations, should they follow this? And in a sense that they do, and governments do that through taxation.
Yeah, they're
So, they are.
yeah, that's true. The social net, yeah.
Among the poor or not quite so poor,
Right.
is, the government.
Yeah. So every government has some way that they address the issue, even if it's you ship them out to another city or country or something. Like, that's a policy too, good, bad, or others. I'm sorry, Lynn, do you have a comment or question too?
Back to the gleaning, when I grew up in England, they had laws that they had to leave the edges of the fields with the
Oh, really?
Yes, because I was taught that because I lived around a lot of agriculture and strawberry fields and wheat fields behind our house. There's
Yeah.
a wheat field. And so I learned that this was a law. Somebody told me that, who was a farmer. But if you went in and stole the crop, they could kill you.
Right.
You went into the crops. But isn't that amazing? So that must have been, I'm sure that
Oh,
those
sure.
laws that were put into effect were from this somehow.
I mean, if I was living in an agricultural town in Africa or South America or in Southeast Asia, like right now, and I had crops, like, I think I would probably take a pretty literal approach. I'm not going to harvest all the way to the edges. I mean, there is a one-to-one correlation if you are in that situation, I suppose, but that's not how farming works in America. I think you guys know. It's like huge machines. There's no, that's not how you're going to help the poor necessarily. But you think of, say you're running a bakery or any other kind of food industry, and what do you do with the leftovers, right? That kind of thing. There might be some more analogies. So I think it invites some creative thought on our parts as Christians living in the 21st century to consider how we can do our own part. Christians historically have. And even in terms of policy and things like that, maybe you can be creative and solve the homeless problem in California. But some of it is, how did they become poor? Was it necessarily, it was out of their control and circumstance? I don't know. Yeah, Hugo, come in there.
Years ago, I got to work for a bagel shop, and I was one of their clerks. And one of the things that they would do at the end of the day is all of the bagels that didn't sell, that would be wrapped up in plastic, and they'd go to the poor.
Yeah.
To charity. I also worked at a very fancy restaurant in their kitchen, and at the end of the night, the food was never given out. It went straight to the trash.
Yeah.
That was not
Oh,
given
I
out.
don't know how people could do that.
Well, sometimes the issues are even with the state, like, oh, you cannot, serve certain kinds of food. If it's been sitting out this time, it's a health issue, and sometimes the bureaucracy creates more hurdles to that. I mean, Siafa could probably tell you more, since he does a lot of pickup of like near expired food and Costco and things like that. And one of the advantages of, say, capitalism is a lot of production, but sometimes overproduction. And so it necessarily creates waste, but then a lot of people are getting what they want. One of the classics of communism is famine, like communism and famine. They often go together. Why? Because the state is trying to, control, how much and who gets what and all those things, and they don't always do a good job. That seems to be fact. I mean, I don't know if there's any communists in here, and you can try to correct me on the history of that, but a lot of communist nations have had a lot of famines. So why does that happen? I'd rather have overproduction with waste where everyone gets everything than underproduction and people starve to death by the millions. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I worked with a guy from Russia, and he was saying that they built tractors, and in those days, we put a hook on the back and we hook up different plows and things, but they didn't. They made a tractor for each specialty they had. So a lot of times on the weekends, workers would go back to bury the excess because they would be penalized.
Yeah, right.
If they made too much of something.
Yeah.
So they were always trying to,
Efficiency,
they said light bulbs, and you could never have new light bulbs because people would bring their old light bulbs from home. And oh, he told us all kinds of stories.
Right. Well, Amos 14:15 then concludes with this. After bringing up how unjust they were with the poor, they were not doing the things we just read that the law said they should do. They were not doing it, and so they're being corrected. Seek good and not evil. What they were doing is evil, to mistreat, oppress the poor, give different standards of justice, all that you may live. And so Yahweh, the God of hosts, will be with you, as you have said. Hate evil and love good, and establish justice in the gate. It may be that Yahweh, the God of hosts, will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. So again, this call to repentance, this call to respond to the judgment with a heart that is contrite and wants to, above all things, be with God. Isn't that ultimate? But you know how it's going to go. God is going to genuinely, legitimately call them to repentance, while also knowing that they will not. The Syrians are already coming. Could God stop that? I suppose so. I mean, again, we get into the mind of God, like, he's purposed and planned it. Is it a disingenuous offer of forgiveness and repentance if they relent, knowing that they won't? We don't need to get into all that debate, but it is earnest. It is real, however you want to cut it. That even if God knows this is how it's going to pan out, God can still offer, because he's God, it's a perk of being God. Hey, don't do it. Seek me, and you'll have life. I'll be with you. Hate evil, love good, establish the justice gate. But the essence of our sin is that we won't and we don't, that we have all fallen short of these standards, that it's not just the poor that we have oppressed, but we have done so much evil even to the ones we love. If you're over 5 years old, you've done something probably to someone you love dearly that is just really bad. You shouldn't have done it. You shouldn't have said it. We're all there, and average age here is much older than 5, so we've done so much that should earn and merit the judgment of God. But this is the glory and goodness of God, that God knows we cannot keep this law. We cannot seek the good that we know we ought to seek. We cannot love the good that we know we ought to love. We don't hate the evil that we have in our lives and even that we see around us. What can we do to be right with God? We know the answer. God is the one who must make a way, and he did in Christ. Christ sought good and not evil. Christ was the one who establishes justice and mercy. Christ is the one who was so gracious in all of his interactions with poor and rich alike, calling them to the truth. And he is the only one who died unjustly in this life. And I'm not saying there's not been, innocent people who have been put to death. I know that's true. But in an ultimate sense, all of us are sinners. Only one person ever deserved not to be punished for anything, and that was Jesus. And he took upon himself, he became sin who knew no sin, that we might become the righteousness of God. He took my sin and was considered a sinner on my behalf, so that when God looks at me, he sees his own son, innocent, perfect, pure. I'm none of those things. But by faith, I can lay hold of that. Have you laid faith in this Christ who did this for you? Do you consider that you've done all these things perfectly? Again, I'd love to meet the perfect person here. But if you're not, then you need Jesus as much as everyone else has and does. And so will you come to him?